What's up guys, it's discussion day. This isn't really a teaching day, even though it probably could have been, but this is more of a card discussion or card talk, so I'm going to put it in that category instead, because it's a little more freeform and just kind of my current musings. And I really can't wait for this video because this is going to get all the hate comments, or at least I have a very good feeling that it might. The subject of today's discussion is whether or not one can truly objectively look at a card and say whether it is good or bad or just whatever. I recently had a discussion, let's say, with a person who commented on one of my videos. I'm not going to name names or anything because that would be, I think it'd be a little unfair, about whether or not cards that I put on a worst of list are actually truly bad or if it's simply just a subjective opinion. Basically, one of the classics, all cards are good arguments that drive me completely batty. However, I will try to be objective in this discussion about my objectivity with cards. You know what I mean. But before we get into the discussion, I'm going to put it right out in the middle of the field of battle here and say that my current opinion on the whole thing, whether somebody in the comment section below could convince me of otherwise, is that a card, yes, can objectively be looked at from a competitive lens and use that as the one way of telling whether or not the card is actually particularly good or not. But I could just end the video there and that wouldn't be very fun, so let's get into it. We're going to start with the counter argument first because I think that's the one that's the weakest and the one I could defend the least, so I might as well start with it in order to get it out of the way, because otherwise I'm gonna attack it on the end. I'm not gonna give it its due process or whatever. So let's do it! Basically, the opinion would be that every card is good because every card, in some fashion, one way or another, has a function. A card could only truly be useless if it literally said nothing on the card. It was a blank piece of cardboard with those like 3 striped colors on it with the card back that like the machine that prints the cards poops out first as like a tester. Like that's only the truly useless card because it's not a real card. It's literally like a dummy or a what do you call it? There's a term for them. It's not blank. It's like it's not primitive. What is that called? Somebody in the comments will figure it out. But you know what I mean. It's literally a useless card because it's not really even a card, even though it's the right size, has the card back on it. The Yu-Gi-Oh, excuse me, has the little eye of Anubis thing on it and everything. So yes, those are the only truly useless cards because they literally have no effect on them. They're not even a card. They're not a monster. They're not anything. So as long as it is actually a legal card in the game, one could say that this card, regardless of what it is, has some sort of use. For instance, something like, I don't know, Cold Feet is a terrible card when you look at it in a bubble because it just hurts you and does nothing to your opponent. But you could say, if you combo it with Mystical Ref Panel, it's actually okay. So therefore, objectively speaking, the card isn't useless. But now let's get to my opinion on the whole thing. I basically think that the whole all cards are good thing is kind of malarkey. And why is that? Well, I think it comes down to certain cards were printed to be bad, and I think Cold Feet's actually a great example because it was printed as a joke. It was intended to be bad. So therefore, it's a great example of, look, unequivocally speaking, there is useless cards. This one is one of them, and it was done on purpose for the lulz. I think the Mystical Ref Panel thing is actually kind of an accident. But regardless of whether or not that is or not, I can't say that. If we are going to make a list of cards, whether they be the best cards or worst cards, there has to be some sort of objective lens that we can look at things, and I think the only way that we can actually do that is through a competitive lens. Yu-Gi-Oh! At its heart is a competitive game. You directly compete with your opponent. It's literally called a duel. Therefore, the way you look at a cards, whether or not they are usable in a duel, whether you'd want to or not, comes down to whether or not you think the effect of that card is competitive. Whether that's competitive in like the professional sense, like you're going to go to a tournament and do well, or competitive in the schoolyard casual sense, or I'm going to go to a buddy's house and I'm going to beat him in a duel with this card. People like to separate the competitive and casual markets of the game, saying that they're somehow different, but really when you look at cards and whether or not they're good, there really isn't a difference between the two. It's just how much people care about it. If I take my high tier spiral deck and go to the backyard with the buddies, I'll beat them all because my deck's better than theirs. Just as if I went to the tournament, I might beat everyone else because my deck's better than theirs. There's no difference here. My deck it's the same format, the same card pool, everything's the same, it's just the caliber of my opponent. It's still the same game. You really can't say that in one instance or another, my deck is better or worse. It's not. It's the best deck because it's the most competitive. There's no other way of looking at that. I think it's the fact that people differentiate between the two, casual and competitive, is why people tend to defend cards that aren't very good, because they have some sort of fun, cutesy-poo, casual use in a deck that is just for funsies. Now, I am all for playing a deck for fun. My Hippo token deck is totally bogus, but it is a lot of fun to play, and I play it in a casual sense. However, I'm going into it knowing the deck isn't very good, it's not very competitive. If I take it to a tournament, which I have, I won't do very well because it doesn't have a good win condition. I can objectively look at my deck and say, it might be fun, but it isn't good. Because you really can't judge a card based on its funness, because that is not a tangible thing. It's completely subjective. Some people might like stun cards, other people might hate them. But just because you like this stun card, it's not good. It's good if you could bring it to a tournament and it will win, because you need to look at cards objectively if you're going to be like me and make lists. And like I said, the only way I think you can do that objectively is to look at cards through a competitive lens. How do we look at cards through a competitive lens as opposed to just saying to do it? Well, I think card advantage is probably the best way of looking at a card. If a card has a discard 2 cost, like Boogie Trap, or the hell that thing is called, most people are going to look at that card and say, yeah, it's like a neg-3 to use the card and you get 1 back from the grave, meaning it's a hard neg-2. That's going to be very hard for you to make a competitive argument for, because negging yourself 2 resources in the hand is just super, super bad most of the time. Sure, getting a good trap back is great, but not at the cost of paying, which is probably half your hand at any given time. Is the card fun? I don't know. That's up to you, whether or not you want to be the casual player playing the card in a deck because you have some gimmick about recycling a trap card or milling it from the deck to the grave in order to get, like, kind of search the trap. That's all fun and dandy, but those are all 3-4 card combos that are not viable. If it's fun for you, sure, go ahead. I don't object to you doing that. I like to play fun decks too. But is it competitively viable for a card to only be good if it's comboed with a bunch of other cards? No. Long story short, basically whenever I do a worst of or best of list, it's through a competitive lens, because I truly feel it is the only objective way in order to actually tell whether or not a card is good. So that's my thoughts on this subject. I'm trying not to sound too much like a jerk because, I don't know, kind of a controversial video, so my opinion is meant to sound stern and strong, not come off as like a big jerk, but you guys know that. So down in the comments below what you guys think on the subject, and if you think there's another way you can objectively rate cards, I would love to hear it, because frankly, I can't think of one. But if you guys can, you know, there is like, what, 30,000 of you out there who watch my stuff regularly, so yeah, somebody's got to have a different idea than me, and so I welcome that. So guys, let me know in the comments below what you guys think of the video, and remember guys, if you don't troll, no matter who will, I will see you guys next time.
The Destiny board tells me that you should subscribe to the channel, or you could watch some of these other videos. Now excuse me, my Millennium Ring has detected another Millennium item. Oh, it's just Merrick.
Akora, did you remember to get milk? We're out of milk. This milk is bad. It was terrible.